Thank you for a great introduction, and of course, Shana Tova to all of you and all of us. Safe and nice year. We all look forward to it. So, here we go. Today we go to Siberia, and unlike most of other programs that I have already done for CSP, now we go to the territory which is unknown to most of you and most of the people in the world. Not that many people have ever been to Siberia, not that many people have relatives there. So we will try to speak about different aspects of Jewish life in Siberia. And first of all, this is map of Russia, and it includes here also former Soviet Union. So you can see here Belarus and Ukraine, and then there's Russia over here. So this is western part of Russia here on the left, and see this piece here. It's Ural Mountains, big mountains that actually mark the border between European part of Russia and Asian part of Russia. You can see it's much bigger territory of Russia is located beyond those Ural Mountains. Not going into the details, the geographical details, you can call most of this territory as Siberia. Officially, this part on the right is called Far East, and this part near the mountains will be Ural area, but for us, to make it easier, we will call all this territory as Siberia. So what we're going to do today, we will speak about the first Jews who settled in Siberia and why it actually happened, and what made those Jews different and unique and special, what kind of Jewish heritage we have in Siberia. We will also speak about Jewish National Republic called Birobidzhan. It was part of Soviet Union and now it's part of Russia. And we will also talk about Siberia and Jews during the Second World War, during the Holocaust, and what the connection and what role Siberia played in the Jewish history in the 20th century. Now again, to make it kind of a more visual, this is western part of European part of Russia. It's most of Russian cities, most of active life is going on here, and then Ural Mountains and Siberia, this giant territory. Siberia, aside of the cities that exist there and that we're going to visit, but Siberia is not very much populated. There are giant territories covered with woods and lots of powerful rivers. And in the modern times, lots of travelers go there specifically to enjoy this innocent nature, to enjoy this innocent environmental beauty with the mountains and lakes and rivers and woods. Also, Siberia, it's the area where still some of the indigenous peoples live that do traditional hunting, and that makes it a bit similar to Alaska, right? It's the much of Siberia, especially northern part of it, is really cold. Like in the northern part of Siberia, it's already snowing, although it's the end of September, so people still wear a lot of fur there, of course. Siberia is very rich with different natural sources, so fur and woods, two things. Then Russian golden mines are located in Siberia. Gas we have from Siberia, diamonds, as well as emeralds, as well as rubies, as well as sapphires. We have it in Siberia. Lots of different types of precious and semi-precious stones, they are to be found in Siberia. And also a lot of fish, giant industry there would be fishing and all the production surrounding it. Siberia was conquered by Russian army, mainly by Cossack army, during 16th, 17th centuries, meaning that the troops of Cossacks crossed the mountains and then conquered the land, sometimes killing indigenous peoples there, sometimes converting them into Christianity. So Siberia became Russian land only in the 16th, 17th centuries. And from the very beginning, Russian government needed to establish cities there and to populate it with Russians or Ukrainians, so to replace most of the indigenous people of Siberia. So, and Siberia from the very beginning started playing a very important role in Russian social and political life. As soon as it was conquered, it became a place of exile. The main punishment for a criminal or political offense in the Tsar Russia, it was an exile to Siberia. It could be either hard labor or actual imprisonment or a placement in a certain town or village with the permit for farming or for specific craftsmanship. So Siberia, all along 18th and 19th century, kept receiving more and more people from the western part of Russia, from the capital of Russia, St. Petersburg, from other cities, and those were absolute majority of those people. They were either criminal exiles or political exiles. There were lots of different levels of the how harsh this exile could be, and sometimes it was this kind of a labor camp, or it could be the whole family exiled together and placed in a house to do farming or craftsmanship, and so on and so forth. Also, and then in the most cases, those who were exiled to Siberia, they had no right to return. So even, let's say, if you had like 15-year-long punishment, then after that you still had to stay there. So lots of those people, they would marry there, they would have family there, and they would settle there even after their official exile term would end. Also, in the early 18th century, there were several ethnographic expeditions organized to study Siberia, and those expeditions actually discovered those vast natural resources of Siberia, such as gas, coal, gold, iron, silver, copper, diamonds, and so on and so forth. So the whole network of those specific state-owned enterprises were established all around, specifically southern Siberia, mainly using the forced labor. So it's a big part of Russian culture, this whole story of the exile to Siberia. If you are ever interested in Russian literature, for example, if you ever read Dostoevsky, you may know that he was also exiled to Siberia, and he received a special permit to return to the capital of Russia after the end of his term. Jews. First Jews in Siberia, we see them already in the 17th century, and they are no different from everybody else. Exactly the same Jews that committed a crime or were suspected to commit a crime, doesn't matter, but the court made a decision to exile them to Siberia. The same thing with the Russians or any other ethnic group. Also, in the middle of the 17th century, there was a Russian-Polish War, and the war prisoners of that story, they were also exiled to Siberia, so that Moscow would be cleaned of Jews or Catholics. So the first wave of Jews in Siberia, the exiles, political or criminal. The laws in Russian Empire were complicated, and sometimes people did commit very serious crimes. Sometimes it was enough to cross the border, to do some minor thing, and then you're exiled to Siberia. Later in the 19th century, there were new waves. They were Jewish soldiers, those who, first of all, there were Cantonist Jewish children that were taken to the Russian army, and so they were sent there to study how to become soldiers before start their actual service. And also the soldiers who, during their service, they could have been placed in Siberia as well. And also in the 19th century, step by step, we see Jews who wanted to move to Siberia, who heard that there were great natural resources, that there was this giant and empty market, and that they could go there and change their life for better because of the economical reasons. There was a law of 1812 that allowed Jews to come and settle in Siberia. It didn't last for long. Very soon after Jews started coming to Siberia, the law changed, and all along 19th century, it kept changing back and forth. And we know the cases of Jews who wanted to move to Siberia so badly that they received like a fake documents that they were criminals, so that to get a permit to settle in Siberia. Why? Because of the economical reasons. This is former capital of Russian Empire, St. Petersburg. This is Moscow, and this is Trans-Siberian Railway from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. If you go, for example, from Moscow to Omsk, let's say, it's about a little less, but about 2,000 miles. Siberia starts here where you see Yekaterinburg. It's Ural Mountains, and what's beyond it to the east, that's Siberia. As you can see, the railroad goes along the southern part of Siberia, and that's exactly where the major cities are located: Tyumen, Omsk, Tomsk, Irkutsk, and so on. This northern part of it is beyond the Arctic Circle, and it's not much populated. Very few cities are located here. Let's look at some cities. For example, Tobolsk, Western Siberia. Looking at the records of 1813, we see that there was already several Jewish unions, including very important Hevra Kadisha. There was a separate Jewish cemetery. There was praying house. We also see in the records that in 1816 there was a Jewish merchant who donated a giant amount of money in gold for building of Russian Orthodox Church, so he was permitted to settle in this town along with his entire family, open a synagogue for the needs of the local Jewish community. Why would he do so? Because in Siberia you have gold. You have diamonds, you have fur, you have woods. So here you can start successful business and become wealthy. These are the views of Tobolsk today. This is the area where the synagogue was originally located. Or Khabarovsk, a small town in Siberia. This is the synagogue here. It's the same building with the little nicer top. At the beginning of the 19th century, the governor of Siberia wrote in his diary that Khabarovsk is a new established settlement, and when he arrived there, what surprised me, a lot of gypsies and Jews. So even at the beginning of those new towns being built, there were already Jews coming there by law or against the law, trying to catch, good fortune. There was a Russian geographer who passed through Khabarovsk in the middle 19th century, and he mentioned that the numerous Jewish population makes the city similar to the Russian cities in the western part of Russian Empire, meaning to the Pale of Settlement. They, Jews, make up 4/5, so majority of the city's total population, and we're traditional Jewish clothes and side curls, Jewish presence transformed the city into one of the main centers of economic activity in the Siberian territories. And it's true, if every place where Jews were allowed to settle immediately became important market area, important trade centers. So Khabarovsk is not an exception. Is not an exception. Tomsk, one of the large cities in the southwest of Siberia. In the mid-19th century, there were already over 2,000 Jews, constituting about 8% of the city's general population. They had a synagogue, it's the old and the new photograph of it, and the interior, and the yeshiva, and a technological college for Jewish men, and so on and so forth. So they created a large community in Tomsk. Or Irkutsk, another city in the southwest of Siberia. It's the old photograph and the new one of Irkutsk synagogue. Altogether, we see that at the end of the 19th century, there were about 40,000 Jews in Siberia. It's small percentage, but they concentrated in the big cities. They concentrated in those areas where the active trade existed. Especially after the Trans-Siberian Railroad was built in the early 20th century, lots of Jewish merchants, traders, artisans from the Pale of Settlement started arriving in Siberia, again, with legal or illegal. They just wanted it. It was a little bit of this gold rush going to Siberia because it's so rich. Prior to the First World War, they were already over 50,000 Jews here, and then it also continued, the Jewish population of Siberia continued growing in the early 20th century. Finally, about 80% of the merchants in Siberia were Jews. So very fast, Jews took control of most of the leading markets in Siberia. And that's how they were able to build these beautiful synagogues. Look at this Omsk synagogue. They had two, the old and new ones. This Tomsk, another big city. At some point, it reminds us a little bit of the cities in the western part of Russia with those streets and the 2-3-story buildings and the marketplace. So something familiar to us already. It's just in Siberia. Or Chelyabinsk. Look at the synagogue. But it's pretty impressive, isn't it? It's quite a place, quite a building showing off the community. These men, these are gold industrialists in Siberia. It was one of the main businesses there. And Siberians, in Russia, we say that Siberians constitute like a specific ethnic group with their own personality, very strong people who like to drink, but also know how to work, who are decisive and strong and can fight different obstacles and are not afraid of the harsh winter. And Jews in Siberian, they became Siberians, first of all. And already in the second half of the 19th century, many observers saw it very well that Jews in Siberia, first of all, underline that they are Siberians more than anything else. So we spoke a little bit about the people doing crafts and businesses, and another group of Jews in Siberia, they're Jewish soldiers. These two groups usually were quite separated from each other. They were in a very different levels in terms of money and the style of living. So usually in every city there was soldier synagogue like this one, separated from the main synagogue, from the merchant synagogue. These are some of the photographs of Jewish families in Siberia in the late 19th, early 20th century. And what we clearly see that Jews in Siberia, when we look at them, we could hardly recognize that these people are specifically Jewish, that they would not differ in their costume from the others living in Siberia. And one of the travelers said that talking to Jews here in Siberia, I hear them speaking with a proud and haughty heart. We are Siberians and more Siberians. Whatever question you ask, whatever you talk to them about, they will not miss an opportunity to declare their Siberianness. And the best of the best add to their family tree. Also, our fathers and our fathers' fathers were Siberians. So it's interesting how Jews here in this territory became something different, because Jews never said we're Lithuanians. No. But here in Siberia, Jews said we are Siberians. We are special, we're unique, we're different. We left behind our shtetl life and we built completely different life here. We do have all our institutions, but generally speaking, Jews of Siberia were much less orthodox and much less stuck to the religion, much less traditional compared to the Jews of the Pale of Settlement. Look at these two photographs. It's not it's not me who found this similarity. It's the professor of Vladimir Levin, the professor of Jewish University in Jerusalem, the director of the Center of Jewish Art. On the left, this is photograph of the synagogue in Omsk, and on the right, this is Vienna synagogue. You can see the similarity. So Vladimir Levin, he makes a point that Jews in Siberia, they did not want to look at the Pale of Settlement as a standard of Jewish life, not at all. They were looking at Europe, at Austria, at Prussia, as the countries setting the standards for Jewish life. They felt closer to Western Europe rather than to Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine and Belarus. It's also interesting that there is still in many towns in Siberia, we see the houses that originally belonged to Jews, and still many of them have stars on David on them, although they were not religious buildings. Like they were residential. This giant corner building belonged to a very rich man, very rich Jew. He lived in that 2-story building, and this was used for business. And they had stars of David, and most of the researchers say that Jews in Siberia felt much more comfortable in their relations with other people surrounding them. They were not afraid of showing them off. They were not afraid of their Jewishness. They were not afraid of using any symbols that they wanted. And that in general, the relations between Jews and Christians in Siberia were free from that harsh anti-Semitic atmosphere that very often we saw in the Pale of Settlement. So if we look at 19th century Jews in Siberia, we see two big groups. One group that constituted an elite of Siberian Jews. It was criminal and political exiles and their descendants, and Jews who settled in Siberia by their own will. I have to say that there was also a problem with women. See, okay, you're a Jewish man, you're exiled to Siberia, or you're a Jewish soldier, you're in Siberia. Where would you get a bride? So for a long period of time, there was a special business that Jewish shadchanim used to do. They would bring brides from the Pale of Settlement, and the Siberian Jews used to pay giant money to receive a bride. And they even asked the Russian government to get a permit to marry local non-Christian women and convert them into Judaism so that they can have a family. So one part, it's criminal and political exiles and their descendants, and Jews who came and settled in Siberia by their own will. And this is the business elite, Jewish business elite of Siberia. The other part of it, soldiers and also retired soldiers and their families. It's another big group of the Jews in Siberia. Also, in the late 19th century, there was another small group, so-called agricultural settlers, that came to Siberia because government offered them to have plots of land, but they were rather small numbers. 1914, 1917, the period of the First World War, when the troubles started. If you look at this map on the right, see this territory, Lithuania, here, and Ukraine, see Volhynia, Bukovina, see Lvov, Galicia. This territory, it was considered to be very close to the western border of Russian Empire, and there were battles going on there, and the Russian government considered Jews to be not trustworthy people that might not be loyal to the Russian government because they were Jews fighting on the other side. And you know that there was an incredible number of Jews in every army participating in the First World War, and yes, Jews were fighting against each other. So during that war, Russian government deported Jews from the Western territories, especially from Lithuania and also from Galicia, from this territory around Lviv, and also from Latgalia. Latgalia, it's modern Latvia, it's further north. And from modern Belarus here, where you see Brest-Litovsk, and also Ukraine, where you see Volhynia. Altogether, we know that there were about 1 million people deported from the front line, and at least half of them were Jews. Deportation was done in a most brutal way. Usually people were given 24 or maximum 48 hours to pack, and they had to pay for the transportation. If they couldn't pay, they would go by foot. This train, it says here Lviv. It's taking people of Lviv, majority being Jews, to the east of Russia, as far from the front line as possible. So now we have new wave of Jews coming to many parts of Russia, many of the inner territories of Russia, including Siberia. First World War was followed by the Russian Revolution, and we passed that. Now we have Soviet Union. In Soviet Union, the Soviet government had its own idea of what ethnic group is. And Soviet government always underlined that Russian Empire was, as they used to call it, prison of the nations, saying that in Russian Tsar government wanted to Russify everything, wanted to make everyone in the state speak Russian, did not allow ethnic minorities have their own language and their culture, and there were lots of troubles in Poland and so on. Now, Soviet government declared that now every ethnic group has the right for its own culture and its own land. Now, every ethnic group had land, except for Jews. Jews were the only ones without specific territory. So, Soviet government decided to present Jews with their own autonomous region. And it's called Birobidzhan because it's located on two rivers, Bira and Bidzhan, and it's in the Far East, on the border with China, very far from those Western territories where Jews had been traditionally living. It was, it was planned as something interesting. So first of all, it was a joint project of American Agri-Joint and USSR government. USSR government established a special committee on land management of Jewish workers. The life in the former Pale of Settlement was destroyed. It did not exist anymore. All those economical activities of Jews were of no need. Nobody needed a middleman in the Soviet economy. Many Jews suffered from the pogroms and were left without homes, became homeless and incredibly poor. So the plan was to give Jews land where they could do farming, and also create an alternative to Zionism, so to have kind of a red Jerusalem in Soviet Union. So this committee received a land near two rivers, Bira and Bidzhan, 1924. In 1934, Jewish Autonomous Region was created. Have to tell you, Jews never actually wanted to go that far east. See, in the 19th century, Jews wanted to go to Siberia because of the money, because of the financial reasons. Now, the perspective of going this far east and do farming there, it really did not work for Jews. None of it really worked. Birobidzhan, up to today, you have signs in Russian and Yiddish. That's Birobidzhan. This is one of the Soviet banners. Let's build socialist Birobidzhan and have, Jewish communal farms there. So initially, about 3,000 Jews went there. Then in mid-1930s, and there was time in mid-1930s when actually about 19,000 Jews came to Birobidzhan. Half of them immediately left. They didn't like it. So about 8,000 stayed there. No, it didn't work. Jews did not want to go and do farming. The Soviet government changed the conception, and so this banner says, we turn Jewish Autonomous Region into the flourishing land in the Far East. So see, you can have music and activities for kids, and they put different industries, and we're building cities. No, it still did not attract Jews. More of it, even Jews who decided to go to Birobidzhan, there were two waves of mass repressions in Birobidzhan. First wave, it was late 1930s. There were repressions against Jewish officials and intellectuals. So like old elite, they were arrested and executed. And then another wave took place after the Second World War. I have to say that today there are still Jews living in Birobidzhan, about 1,500 Jews. Soviet government did give Jews right there to have Yiddish theaters, Yiddish schools, put street signs in Yiddish, have newspapers in magazines in Yiddish. Jews still did not want it. It was just too far from the traditional life. Those who wanted to be traditional, they would rather stay closer to Ukraine or Lithuania and so on. Those who wanted to be modern, they didn't want Yiddish. They would rather speak Russian than Yiddish. This is a small synagogue in Birobidzhan. If you're interested in Soviet Jewish history and interested to understand different reasons for Jews to participate in a revolution, to act this or that, It's a beautiful book, Yuri Slaskin, The Jewish Century. It explains very well, and part of it, it explains also why Jews specifically did not want to go to Birobidzhan, why this idea of farming in the Far East did not work for Soviet Jews. See, in 1930s, it was time when Soviet Union was building giant factories, turning country into this industrial land. So for modernized Jews, for Soviet Jews, it was more reasonable to stay in the big cities and stuck to the industries rather than go Far East for, unreasonable, in an absolutely unreasonable situation. 1948-49, there was giant anti-Jewish campaign all around the country, all around Soviet Union. In Birobidzhan, it was very active with the purpose to stop and prevent actually any Jewish activities in the region. Finally, the only Jewish thing which was left, it was this newspaper, Birobidzhan Stern. It was published all along the Soviet times. 1949, Jews who gathered in the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah celebration were arrested. The rabbi was sentenced to death. Jewish writers were arrested. Jewish theater was closed. Teaching in Yiddish was stopped in schools. Books in Yiddish were seized from the library. So after the Second World War, late 1940s, the idea of Jewish region ended up absolutely done. Even though officially it still exists, but it has no meaning what was given to it at the beginning. In the final stage of those anti-Semitic campaigns of the Stalin times, it was of course 1953. It started in Moscow. It's this infamous doctor's plot when Jewish doctors were accused in trying to murder the leaders of the Soviet government. They were imprisoned. There were articles in the newspapers explaining that they were members of bourgeois nationalistic terrorist organization joined that wanted to actually destroy Soviet Union. And early 1953, January, February, this story of doctor's plot, it started such a terrible and giant anti-Semitic campaign in Soviet Union that majority of Soviet Jews of Moscow, of Leningrad, of Vilnius, of any other place, they were 100% sure that next day they were going to be put on the trains and exiled to Birobidzhan. There were strong rumors and there was strong belief that the trains were ready to take all Soviet Jews to Birobidzhan. But Stalin died over Purim of 1953. He died, and so we don't really know whether there was a plan of such an exile or not. Back a little bit to late 1930s, and this is our third subject for today. Look at this map. So we will speak about 1939, 1940, 1941. And we'll speak about deportations of Jews, of Polish Jews, and also Jews from Latvia, Lithuania, and what's today Ukraine, but original was Eastern Poland. In 1939, when Germany occupied Western Poland, there were about 300,000 Jews who decided to run eastward, who crossed the border running to Soviet Union. Most of them were actually young men, very often without families. So what happened? They came to the Soviet territory, and at the beginning, they were accommodated and they could settle in different areas in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Eastern Poland. But in June 1940, those refugees, those Jewish refugees who came from Western Poland, they got arrested. They were given a choice either to accept the Soviet citizenship or not. Those who did not accept Soviet citizenship firsthand, they were deported from this territory to Siberia, Far East, and also North and Central Asia to mainly work in lumber camps. Today, we know the statistics pretty well that absolute majority of Polish Jews who survived the World War II, it's actually Jews who survived it in Soviet Union, most of them in gulags, in the labor camps in Siberia, experiencing forced labor, hunger, illness, but they survived and they were able to leave Soviet Union. So this is a big Polish Jewish family who they're baking matzah for Pesach in 1945 and somewhere in Siberia. It's not very well known fact that absolute majority of Polish Jews, the survivors of the war, they survived it in Gulag, in Soviet Union. So that deportation, which was brutal and terrible, very harsh conditions. Lots of people died on the way, but it still preserved lives of those people. There are lots of books dedicated to it. There are articles and books. You can find an article, Jewish refugees in Soviet Poland. You can find books, Polish Jews in the Soviet Union, or survival on the margins, telling the family stories. Soviet government was really great at arresting and exiling people to Siberia. They had it. It worked very well. Unexpectedly, the soldiers or police would come to your place, take you, put you on the train, and nobody saw you afterwards. The conditions in Siberia. Most of Polish Jews were exiled to Western Siberia, to a little bit easier than what happened to Lithuanian Jews. We'll come to it in a second. Still, the conditions were very harsh. Majority of the land where they were exiled, they were not placed in the big cities. They were placed in the villages where they had to find jobs, they had to find a place to live, do some basic farming so to feed the family. It was very, 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 very harsh life. Jews were able to find jobs in different factories, especially during the World War II, or they would work on cutting in those areas, cutting trees. Very difficult life. At the age of hunger, with the illnesses, without money, without supply, but still alive. Now, next stage, Soviet occupation. First of all, Poland, 1939, then June, July 1940, Bessarabia and Bukovina, which is Moldova and Ukraine, and July 1940, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. As soon as Soviet government occupied these territories, they established their Soviet government. Soviet government, now, anybody who was the member of any nationalistic group, Zionists, or the members of any national group, it did not concern Jews only, but it concerned locals in these territories, Lithuanians and Latvians and Estonians and Poles, anybody who had something to do with religion, anybody who had business. They were the enemies of the Soviet regime, so they were arrested and deported as criminals to the Far East, to the northern and eastern part of Siberia, to much more difficult conditions. Soviet deportations were massive. We speak about tens of thousands of people. You may find very, very different numbers. There are no specific numbers about Jews, but you may find the number of the citizens of Lithuania, the citizens of Latvia, of Estonia, of Bessarabia, of Eastern Poland. They were deported together. This time, let's say Jews and Lithuanians, they shared common fortune. They were deported together, and they would be placed in a labor camp together. This is the map of so-called Gulag system. It's the Gulag, it's the system of those forced labor camps, doing mines, pits, lodging, construction. They were located all around Soviet Union, and many of them in Siberia. This is southern Siberia, a bit easier, and this is northern Siberia. The worst conditions were here, and also in the Far East. And that's where majority of Lithuanians, for example, and Lithuanian Jews were exiled. And these are conditions, hard labor. They were exiled as prisoners, as political prisoners. So they had to work really hard. In most cases, men were separated from women and children. Very often children were separated and put into like orphanages to be raised as the right Soviet citizens. One of the examples, and you may find quite a number of such stories, the example of Menachem Begin. So Menachem Begin, that's his family photograph, that's him on the left in Poland prior to the Second World War. Now, in September 1939, after Germany invaded Poland, Menachem Begin ran from Warsaw to Vilna, so to the east. In Vilna, as soon as Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet army, by the Soviet Union, and proclaimed Soviet Lithuanian Republic, he was arrested as a Zionist, and also because he was the officer in the Polish army. So he was arrested, put into the prison, and then exiled to Siberia as the agent of British imperialism, so as suspected a spy. Then, so he was sent to Siberia, to Pechora labor camp here. Now, after Germany attacked Soviet Union, there was especially agreement that Polish citizens who wanted were able to join a special Polish Anders army. So he joined that army, and that's why he was released from that labor camp, and that's how he ended up in Palestine. That's him already in this army. So from Poland to Lithuania, from Soviet Lithuania to Siberia, from Siberia released into the Polish army, and then that's how he was able to leave. Also, those who kept their those Jews and Poles who preserved their Polish citizenship after the war, they were able to leave Soviet Union and go back to Poland, and then Poles would stay there, but Jews would leave Poland and never stay there. It was actually, it's interesting to see that in exile in Siberia, Poles and Jews, Lithuanian and Jews, they shared common fortune. But after the war, the situation became different. It was different situation with Polish Jews and Lithuanian Jews. See, Polish Jews spent about 7 years in Soviet Union, and they were led to leave Soviet Union after the war. Lithuanian Jews were usually 15, 16 years in Siberia, and they had major difficulties going back home, and when they returned home, there was no home. And it's very well explained in the memoirs that when Lithuanian Jews returned to Lithuania. Unlike Lithuanians, they found no home. So for them, there was no place to settle in Lithuania anymore. There was nothing left out of what they used to love out of their homes. Also, it seems that because they were exiled so far north, so far from the civilization, many Lithuanian Jews say that they were able to continue some religious practice, and so it was ignored by the Soviet government. So for example, there was this town Yakutsk, it's up in the northern part of Siberia, and there were memoirs of Jews who from Lithuania gathered in Yakutsk and formed a community so they could celebrate Shabbat, they could have Jewish holidays together, but the conditions of life were incredibly harsh. This is how Yakutsk looked like after the war in the Soviet times. Yakutsk, as many other cities in Siberia, especially North Siberia, suffer a lot from floods. Look at it. This is the spring flood where you can't walk, you need to use boat to go from one place to another. And you have wooden houses and very little very little understanding of a comfortable life. And these were the conditions of Lithuanian Jews in Siberia. See, building the railroads, building roads, cutting trees without instruments. Soviet government never bothered to provide prisoners in those labor camps with instruments. Why would they? Go and work with your hands, with your arms. You survive, you survive. You don't, we don't care. It was a very, very, very harsh life. If we look at the maps of this northern part, Vorkuta, Salehard, Norilsk, Nadim, these are the places where Lithuanian Jews were exiled. Tiksi, Cherkasky, here. Sometimes they were sent to the tiny island to do fishing there, having no other people around them. They just had to survive there. There was and then what happened, Polish Jews, majority of Polish Jews were able to leave Siberia and go back to Poland after the war, or even leave before and join the Soviet Polish army. And then Lithuanian Jews were only liberated after the death of Stalin, when that system of Gulag was closed. Today, if we travel along this Trans-Siberian Railway, we will just go from one city to another, and many of those cities, they look nice. This is Tyumen, the first stop on the way, a nice river, and it's a big industrial city, and it still has Jewish community there. There is a synagogue in Tyumen. There's Omsk, another large cities in Siberia. People still like living there, still kind of have this soul of Siberia. Although I have to tell you that even with all the modern technologies, life is difficult there, very difficult. And Omsk still has Jewish community. Novosibirsk, one of the largest cities in Siberia. Novosibirsk meaning new Siberian city. That's the photo from the World War II. See, people had to live in a tiny wooden homes. This is the modern synagogue newly built in Novosibirsk. This is Tomsk. These are photographs of the Second World War, and we saw this former Jewish home in Tomsk. That's the synagogue. It's a large city with this significant Jewish heritage, with a lot to see and study about Jewish past. That's Irkutsk, also some of the photographs of the war times. See, lots of industries, lots of factories and institutions were evacuated from the western part of Soviet Union to Siberia. So Siberia played incredibly important role during the Second World War, and lots of Jews survived war in Siberia also because they were working there in different institutions and on the factories. That's Irkutsk synagogue that also survived and have never been destroyed. Or Khabarovsk, another large city in along the Trans-Siberian Railway. That's a newly built synagogue of Khabarovsk, and some of the photographs of the Second World War. They had a giant factory producing tanks in Khabarovsk. Again, I always encourage you to read more, to study more. There are books and articles. If you look for the article, A Polish Girl's Journey Across 3 Continents, it tells the story of a Jewish girl, Danuta, who actually had nearly exactly the same family story as Menachem Begin, from Poland to Siberia, from Siberia to the army, and thanks to the army to Palestine. A very interesting story and a very interesting article. There is another book, A Shelter from the Holocaust. Again, it's the book about the Jewish survival in the Soviet Union, especially in Siberia. Also, there were other places of exile, for example, Asian part, a little bit to the south from Siberia, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan a little bit. Those were also places where Jews were exiled, and also that's where they survived the war. So that was what I wanted to show you today. I hope it was interesting for you, and so I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you. I know for me personally, and I guess there were at least 20 other families that had connections to Siberia. You explained from my side how I knew how my Lithuanian great-grandparents ended up in Siberia. I don't know exactly where they ended up, but you're going to help me find that, you said. But thank you for explaining a lot about their life. My great aunt and great uncle eventually were able to get out, and they went to Israel, and they are in Kfar Chabad today. Survivors from that side of the family. So here's a few questions I noticed as people asked. Are there Jews in Vladivostok? I don't know if you mentioned that.
Yes, part. Yes, there are Jews in Vladivostok. Yes, yes. Vladivostok is that city in the far, far, far east, on the shore of the Japanese Sea. Yes, there are Jews in Vladivostok. Mm-hmm.
And then you didn't mention like Jewish life today in Siberia. Are there lots of Jews in Siberia today overall? And then is it similar to what you've told us about the rest of Russia? Is Chabad the main shul, the main Jewish community in those communities?
It's exactly the same. Post-Soviet Jewish life is more or less the same all around the post-Soviet territory. There are still Jews living there in Siberia. There are still Jewish families and Jewish communities in every large Siberian city like Vladivostok, Irkutsk, Tomsk, and so on. And the synagogues that exist there, they're all being driven by Chabad. It's Chabad everywhere.
So I assume it's not the top Chabad Shaliach location. Like if they offer you Orange County, Southern California, or Siberia, I think you want like Malibu, or Newport Beach is my guess. Tucson, no. Right? Rabbi Savinar and someone else asked a question about the connection between Jews of Harbin, China, and the Siberian Jews. Is there a connection between the two communities?
Yes, because at some point Harbin belonged to Russian Empire, and so they were Russian Jews in Harbin, and then Harbin became kind of a gate for Siberian Jews, for wealthy Jews who did not want to be part of the Soviet Union, who wanted to run away as soon as the revolution broke out, so they could run through Harbin. Yes, it was like this gate for Jews to leave Soviet Union in the early years.
There are questions about what you mentioned about Polish Jews given the option of becoming Russian citizens or staying Polish, and if they were Polish, they were sent to Siberia. Why didn't they choose to be Russian and just avoid going to Siberia?
Oh, that's a good question. You see, Jews who ran into the Soviet territory, they were very different. Some of them were socialists. Some of them were even communists. So they were happy to become part of Soviet Union and be free from the limits that Jews had, for example, in pre-war Poland. Others did not want it and actually thought of going back to Germany and thought maybe this whole, I mean, they would not believe that what was going on in Poland, and so they thought of going back. So each family had, specific reasons, but Jews were not one single soul, one single piece. They were Jews of a very, very, very different, driven by different ideas. Generally speaking, I have to say, the Jews who ran to east to the Soviet Union, they had a great courage for many reasons. First of all, everybody was afraid of Soviet Union, and they had to be brave enough to understand that Germany was much more dangerous than Soviet regime. Also, they were not really welcomed by the Soviet border guards. They were all suspected to be spies. So they were met with great suspicion, and sometimes they were sent back. There were cases of Jews being sent back to Poland by the Soviet border guards.
Question that kind of bothers me is, since my great-grandparents were suffering with the other Lithuanian Jews in Siberia, and you mentioned at the beginning that they were actually very established, wealthy Jewish communities in Siberia, did those wealthy Jewish communities help the other exiled Jews who were suffering, or did they kind of...
Great question. Great question. Between 1939 and 1917, there were more than 20 years. 1917, revolution in Russia. The private property was expropriated. Wealthy Jews were not able to preserve their wealth. Either they left Russia very fast after the revolution, or they just lost what they had and became ordinary Soviet citizens. Plus, in the absolute majority cases, Lithuanian and Polish Jews, they were exiled not to those big cities in the south of Siberia, but in the north of Siberia, where there was nothing at all, small villages, and that's it, and no Jews in the surrounding area. So Soviet government, always knew how to mix people and how to separate people, how not to let people come together and form any kind of, union, form any kind of specific ethnic group. So Jews were sent to, and Lithuanians and Poles, they were sent to those empty locations. And lots of those gulag labor camps, they were built in the middle of nowhere, and very often people were sent to the middle of nowhere. They would be brought by boat to the remote island, and that's it, and left there. You survive. Do fishing, that's it. Build your own homes out of wood that you see around you, and survive if you can.
That's a tough life. And I think I shared an article written by my great aunt about life up there, and I'll share it again, about her experiences going from Lithuania to Siberia. And I know people like Ahuva actually got a chance to go to Siberia, to see it for themselves. I have not had the opportunity, and I don't know if anybody's going to Siberia for a long time now. Can you tell us about your adventures to Siberia? Where did you go visit, and what was the purpose of your trips there?
At first, I went to Yekaterinburg, which is Ural Mountains, long ago, and it was very interesting. It was like experiencing something completely different. I clearly saw different personalities of people that would they look like me, but they have different attitude to life, and it's pretty impressive when you come to this point where it says Europe and Asia, and then some about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, We had a trip to Siberia with some of my friends. We had another friend who moved there, so we visited several towns in Siberia, and it's just interesting. It's interesting. Once this whole thing is over, I might want to go to Kamchatka, which is far east region of Russia, but not in the near future because we're not traveling to Russia. Instead, we are rescuing young boys from Russia. It's a big thing now to rescue men from Russia to save them from going to the war and kill, So no chance for me to travel to Russia as long as this, war is going on. But in the future, for sure.
And then a question that's interested me and other people have asked. So if you were from the Lithuanian community and you ended up in Siberia, when were you able to leave? Because my family probably left in the 50s. Does that make sense? They were able to, I guess, get money and then go to Israel. Is that what happened? Is that where many of them went?
Gulag system was closed as soon as Stalin died, and he died in 1953. So then this Gulag system was closed, and the political exiles were able to leave and go back to their original lands. So, and then there was short period when Jews were able to leave Soviet Union. It was late 1940s, a little bit mid 50s, but then those who stayed would stay till mid 70s when this window reopened again.
Interesting. So people have been chatting to me that they appreciate you filled a lot of missing information, puzzle pieces into their life so they can understand their family history better. And many people didn't know anything. I mean, I knew a little bit about Siberia, but you've certainly given us a lot of geographical information. So we now understand Siberia, where it is, how big it is, and how the Jews ended up there. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I think we're definitely gone a little bit over on our time. So I wanted to thank our audience for sticking around. And I think where are we going next? And in a few months, what did you suggest to me? You given me 3 places. It was part of a series. So
you want Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Bukhara? Let's do that.
We'll
really
do that.
nice.
We'll do that in a few months. We'll invite some of you back if you're nice. Actually, you've got a few more days to do repentance. Tshuva. Don't forget that tzedakah is part of it, and we at CSP are happy to accept your tzedakah. And if you give it to us, we will make sure that God knows. I will tell God it's from you. I'm sure it will help. So no, you're all invited back, even those of you who don't do tshuva. But I hope you do. I hope you have a meaningful period of time now, that you have a meaningful Yom Kippur. And yes, I hope you understand the Jewish world a little better. I do. So thank you, Evgenia. And looking forward to seeing Evgenia in Israel. Those of you coming with me to Israel, we're going to have dinner with Evgenia on our trip. Take care, everybody. I will see you on Sunday. But we'll learn about Sukkot with Gila Fine. Okay. Another awesome program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be safe, everybody. Bye. Get your flu shots. Bye. If you're a member of Chabad and they landed up in Siberia, you should tell me, because I always wonder what it's like when they tell you where you're going on Shlichut. If it's like that play. What was that play with the Mormons? The Book of Mormon. Where they send the Mormons all around the world and people are really want to go to Orlando. I wonder what happens when they tell you you're going to Siberia. Anyway, if you have a Chabad relative, tell me what they say. Take care, everybody.